I am Barry Bridges with ACMP Texas. I'm the Regional Director for San Antonio. And for those of you who just joined us, we were just having a lively pregame discussion, a little question and answer. And so you didn't miss the real value tonight, but we're glad to have you. Tonight's session is brought to you by ACMP Texas San Antonio. We're happy to see folks from all over Texas, and glad to have you joining us tonight. Just to let you know what we're going to cover, tonight's presentation is going to be shared by email following the session. Plus, we are going to be doing a recording of the session that will be shared on the ACMP Texas YouTube channel very soon. So just to let you know that, we had that pregame informal networking, quick introductions here. We're going to dive right into the presentation. I'll be preparing some groups for breakout discussions. It looks like, Jason, right now, it looks like we have about 40 people in. So that'll be about 4 groups for a structured discussion. And then we'll follow that up with just a return and shares, kind of a guided discussion with the presenter, and Jason doing a lot of what we were just doing in the pregame, some great discussion around that. We'll try to wrap up around 6:55 and have you out by 7 to get your delivery on your front porch or your drive-through, whatever you want for supper, but we are glad to have you tonight. So there has been much discussion regarding the need to incorporate design thinking into change management, and among industry thought leaders, there's a lot of conversations going on. Unfortunately, many practitioners are still struggling with where to start, what stages to during a change initiative should design thinking be applied. So what we're working for tonight, this actually kicks us off on a series of design thinking that we're planning for the fall. But during this 1-hour interactive webinar, Culture Designs, Jason Burnham will share some simple design principles that you can apply to change and transformation programs tomorrow when you go back to work. With over 25 years as a global business strategist and an organizational development consultant, Jason Burnham is committed to helping organizations and communities design sustainable solutions to accelerate innovation, build resiliency, and drive continuous improvement. Through his culture design practice, Jason equips clients with the capabilities to access, design, and develop thriving cultures to ensure strategy realization, brand activation, and operational excellence. And also, he worked with a global organization that is very well known in doing precisely this in the United Nations, which impressed me when I first found out about it. So great to have you, and join me tonight in welcoming Jason Burnham, and I'm going to turn the screen sharing over to him for the presentation.
Beautiful. Thank you, Barry. Much appreciated. All right, let's see if I can share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Looks like we're there.
Okay, let me just, I love how, whatever you do, when you do the screen share, just screws up everything in Zoom. So I'm just getting my images. There we go. Okay. And thank you, everybody. I don't want to, Barry, you gave such a great introduction. I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself here. But just to, just really quickly, yes, I mean, Culture Design, we are, a small independent consultancy, really focused on helping companies with innovation, helping to apply design thinking into the change management practice, and then helping to build platforms of continuous improvement. And by all means, if if anybody has any questions after this call, I'm more than happy to make myself available and talk through maybe some of the challenges that you're having within your own organizations as well. Okay. So just to really kick things off, I want to throw this question out there for the group. What is change management? How do you define change management? And feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself and share. Deb?
Change management is a large and perhaps most important piece of project management around any transition that's occurring in the strategic space for corporates and also for small businesses and even individuals.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anne, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, mine's more simple, process adoption.
Good. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, ProSci's definition is driving change success by preparing, equipping, and supporting individuals to thrive through change, which I think, in general, I think is a good definition. I like to get a little bit more specific than just change, right? And so I like to, and also too, it's being more outcomes driven, right? So I like to think about it as facilitating collective action to achieve future state outcomes, right? So how do we actually move an organization to realize our strategic goals? And many times with a lot of change initiatives, people aren't necessarily being held accountable all the way through, right? We kind of get through this implementation process, especially within digital transformations, where a lot of the focus is on the technological implementations, but not necessarily about how those technologies then get adapted and how it's changing over individual roles, ways of working, and really being able to educate people on why this shift is going to help improve what they do on a day-to-day basis and how to best take advantage of this new change. Right. And so you can tell there's a lot there that ultimately needs to be unpacked throughout the change process. And, design thinking, applies more to the process of how we get answers to the key questions around change management. So I'm assuming a lot of people here on the call are familiar with the ADKAR model, right, by ProSci. But let's really unpack, what this really is. And just, for people that may or may not be as familiar with the ProSci model, just a really quick overview in terms of how this breaks down. Within the within phase one, which is around preparing the approach, defined success is really about, what are we trying to achieve, right? Defining the impact is about who has to do the jobs differently and how. And defining the approach is about what will it take to actually achieve success. And phase two around managing change, the plan and act aspect answers the question around what will we do to prepare, equip, and support people. Track performance is about how are we actually doing, right? How well are we actually implementing this change? And how are we adapting these actions, which is what adjustments do we actually need to make? Now that we've embarked on this change journey, right? What challenges are we encountering? What barriers need to be removed? All of these things. And that's a great area where design starts to get applied, right? So we're gonna talk about that in a minute. And then lastly, the phase three around sustaining outcomes, right? So review performance is about, now, where, and we, right? So like, where are we now? Where are we going? And what do we need to, and what do we need in order to be successful? And then the activate sustainment answers the question around what is needed to ensure that the change sticks, right? What do we need to make sure that we can actually sustain this? The biggest challenge with a lot of change initiatives when they start, I know many of you have probably embarked on these kind of multi-year change initiatives, but you start these journeys, but it doesn't necessarily account to all the disruptions and things and emergent priorities and needs that happen, right? We have to change the way we actually change and being a lot more agile in how we're deploying these different types of change initiatives, because you could be 2 years in on a 3-year transformation and then something like COVID hits, right? And then what? All of a sudden, everything changes. You've got to do everything differently. So how do you now, do you mean go back to the drawing board? Well, that would be one way, but maybe it's not the most efficient way. Maybe there's ways of adapting to the future that's kind of unfolding before you and making sure that you're engaging stakeholders throughout the process to be able to make those shifts and make those pivots along the way without having to go back to the start. And this is where we start to get to the transferring of ownership of who's going to actually own this and sustain the outcomes. And I cannot drill home enough around the accountability around the outcomes, because I think that's where a lot of people get frustrated with people who have to be the ones at the receiving end of the change, is trying to understand like why this change is necessary, what value is it going to provide, how's this going to help improve what I do on a day-to-day basis, and what are those outcomes? How are those outcomes for this initiative going to be different from the outcomes I'm already working towards? Right. So it's important to make sure that as we're communicating with employees, that they have that understanding all the way through. But I figure I wanted to ground everyone in this because I felt this was going to be the most familiar framework that everyone is aware of. Some of you may be familiar with this. You may have seen something similar to this before, right? I mean, this is very common in design thinking, how it gets applied to innovation, this idea of viability, desirability, and feasibility. And the notion here being that when we think about innovation and we think about the experience that we're trying to create for people, and ideally, I mean, if we really think about it, change management is a big component of innovation. We think about design thinking in the context of innovation, and many people within, who manage change initiatives feel that that design and that innovation happens at the beginning. And then there's these activation plans and implementation plans and roadmaps that then change management is meant to then implement. However, I believe innovation is the process of bringing ideas to life, right? You can have all the ideas in the world, but unless you actually implement them and they're sustainable and people adopt those new changes, it's not really innovative, right? And when we think about innovation and change management, it is important to think about it in this context of experiences that we're creating for people. Most change initiatives are driven by improvements to the customer experience, improvement to partner relationships, improvement to different functions and different departments. And, and so as we think about a business embarking on a change initiative, it's important to recognize that, yes, in order for it to be viable, the business needs to be able to be behind it. Leadership needs to be aligned and supportive of it. It needs to be able to satisfy business, business goals and strategic outcomes. But then also the organization has to be enabled to do it as well. And that really is where the feasibility comes into play, right? Aside from, technology is the big component, right? You have the systems and the technologies to help, drive this new change forward, or maybe you're developing those technologies, to achieve a particular strategic outcome, but also thinking about those processes, right? How are we in terms of processes, workflows, systems, governances, right? Like governance models, like all of those things need to be taken into consideration in order to really test, the feasibility of being able to move something forward. And then lastly, the desirability, which is the people. So depending on what you're implementing change for and what you're designing for, so that may be customers, they need to make sure that what you're creating and delivering for them is of value to them, right? Is it something that they actually really care about? And is it even usable? Whatever new change that's being implemented, whatever new innovation that's being deployed out into the market, is it something that people can easily embrace, right? I mean, that's where innovation usually succeeds or fails. It's got to be both, it has to drive both usability and it has to be valuable to the end user. And when we think about change resistance, right, and we think about all the challenges that we're up against when we're trying to facilitate change throughout an organization, let's put the employee in that role of people, right? And let's think about those new changes that have to be implemented. The majority of change resistance that happens at the individual level is because they do not see how this new change is going to be valuable or usable in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? And they don't see how it's actually enhancing what they're going to do. So this is a good place to really kind of ground yourself and also just thinking about change management in the context of innovation and recognizing that with every new encounter that you have, every new resistance, every new barrier, every new challenge should be met with innovation, and recognize that that is a problem that we need to innovate to solve for in order to realize our strategic outcomes, right? And to achieve our goals around this change initiative. Now, this is another framework which you may be familiar with if you start to dabble a little bit in design thinking. So as much as I mentioned about, every resistance, challenge, and barrier to change should be met with innovation to overcome those hurdles, this starts to become the framework that should be applied. So now let's really think through like what this actually means in all these different steps, okay? So you've embarked, you have a change initiative underway, all right? Let's just say it's for a new, database management system, right, across the organization. Now, the first thing we need to do is empathize, right? Understanding what are the needs, the values, the priorities, and expectations, of those actors and stakeholders that are going to be implementing this change, right? What other stresses do they have in the day? What other projects right now are being prioritized on their workload, right? Like, where are they? I mean, just think about the mental health issues that are emerging now within organizations, right? What are people experiencing? What are they going through, right? It's important to have that understanding, that context, so you know how to communicate, you know how to engage them, you know what type of education programs are going to help equip them with the skills and the knowledge and the tools to help move the change forward. But then it's about understanding and defining exactly what that problem is. Like all design, all innovation is about trying to solve some sort of problem or trying to alleviate some sort of barrier to achieve a strategic outcome. So it's important to define what exactly that problem is within the context of understanding what people's needs and priorities and expectations are, and then move into ideation, right? And this is where, let's say you're implementing a particular change program and you have a roadmap and it's touching, let's say, 5 different functions across the organization. Well, the best thing you could do is actually hold co-creation listening sessions and ideation sessions with those different functions and departments to say, hey, listen, Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's how this is going to touch, your function. How should we think about implementing this change? And maybe there's even a better way of doing it. Like, we want to hear from you, and let's work together to figure out how can we best implement this in a way that you're going to find valuable and usable, and ultimately take ownership and accountability of moving it forward. And what we find is when you start to co-create with those actors and stakeholders, right, these new change initiatives, they naturally take greater ownership of it. Because throughout this process, you're instilling a sense of purpose in them with the work that they're doing. This isn't just telling them to go off and do something. This is not a top-down driven, go change your processes, implement this new strategy, and off and running, and you've kind of checked your box. It's kind of saying, hey, listen, we want to empower you, right, to be able to help us move this forward. And when people feel empowered and they're sharing their ideas, and you're taking those ideas and working with those teams to be able to implement these changes with them, very easily they're willing to take ownership of that, especially when you put some sort of performance management and accountability platform in place to make sure that they are implementing those changes. But it's one thing to curate and have all of those ideas, but with any idea, with any new change initiative, you should pilot, or you should prototype it before rolling it out to the entire organization. I'm sure many of you have experienced a big organizational rollout of some big change initiative, and all of a sudden it just becomes chaos. Month over month, just trying to get things done. It's like herding cats, right? Trying to talk to this, this group over here with that group over here, trying to schedule meetings to get people together, right? It can become pretty chaotic. So, if we think about change programs in the context of prototypes, we think about them like as pilot programs. So like whenever we're embarking on a big cultural transformation, we try to start with one area of the organization first, right? Typically the ones that, are going to be most impacted by the change, and really engage them in helping to co-create the best ways of moving it forward, and being able to demonstrate that success in a localized way, and then being able to share those successes, and then rolling that out to other functions and departments, and scaling, in that way, versus just all hands on deck. And I get it. Some change initiatives are all hands on deck because they may be big, systems-wide implementations, but there's a lot of different types of change initiatives. And I think it's, it's important to get a lot more poignant in who you're working with in deploying those types of initiatives, and test it out, right? And so the idea of piloting, the idea of prototyping is really about testing something before putting so many resources and so much money behind a particular initiative without proving its success out first, right? And so this is about taking a bit more of an iterative approach to testing. And when you do hit those barriers, when you do hit those challenges, when you do hit those resistances, you go right back to empathizing. Why is this resistance happening, right? Why is there this resistance? Why is this why is there this barrier? And then working with those stakeholders to help overcome those barriers, okay? I want to pause there for a second. Any questions yet on that context?
Well, no, just in general for innovation, I thought one of the drawbacks of, looking for users' needs is they don't always know what they need. They might be they may not understand totally what they need. And so you're creating, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's because also too, sometimes it's needs and sometimes it's opportunities, and sometimes it's just eliminating pain points. Sometimes they may not know what they need, but they can tell you what their challenges are. Okay. Right? So they might, they can tell you what their challenges are. And then, even if they don't necessarily if they're not equipped with the skills to be able to help figure out how to overcome those challenges, I do believe it should be then the responsibility of the change management team to say, all right, this group or this individual will not move forward because of this particular challenge. That is probably talking to their supervisor, right, or their manager, right, to understand like why this challenge exists. And maybe it has to then, you have to start engaging then at that next level up, right? And maybe you keep engaging at that next level up until you can actually find the right person that can help to remove that barrier, overcome that challenge. Right.
So it's not just knowing the needs. It might be knowing the challenges as well.
Yes. Yeah. We say it's the needs, needs, challenges, and barriers, right? And resistances. Right. Trying to understand those four are very critical to make sure that you're mitigating any kind of resistance to that change. Okay. Any other questions just before we move on? Sure. So just to really synthesize all of this, right now, this is our framework at Culture Design, because essentially when we built out this methodology, we took concepts around the change management discipline, similar to like what you saw with the ADKAR model, and then also looked at the different design frameworks and methodologies to really think through how does this all come together. Now, I'm an old marketing guy, right? I was a brand guy. And, what I found is that, some companies focus so much on building their brand and their sense of identity, why they exist, laying out what their commitments are to their stakeholders and the promises to their customers, but then do very little to actually, implement an entire organizational design and development plan to realize that strategic outcome, right? And to realize that purpose and deliver to those customer promises in a consistent way. So as we start to think about, how change management really fits into the strategic realm of brands, right? Culture, innovation, and then ultimately the brand experience that's being delivered, it's recognizing that your brand identity really centers around who you are, right? Why you care, how you want to be perceived. And that should really define, what your commitments are and promises are to your different stakeholder groups. And ultimately what your organizational or brand purpose is, right? Like that should be your North Star of why you exist. And any change initiative that's being deployed should be in the spirit of realizing your purpose. And this also helps with mitigating some of the why this, why now, why this when we're doing this, and why not this over that, right? And so, and all of these different disparate programs are being deployed without one real cohesion, without a cohesive understanding of how these things all relate to each other and how they're all working together to realize our purpose as an organization. And that then is ultimately going to drive kind of what are the guiding principles around how you start to deliver the change, right, across your different roles and functions. And this is where employee engagement then becomes critical, right? Because that's ultimately going to determine what people do and how people behave and how willing they are to adopt the new changes that are basically being bestowed upon them. But I always start with saying, well, what is that vision? What is the experience we're trying to create? What impact do we want to have? Because when you define that outcome for people and you start to then try to deploy a change management plan, they at least understand and have an understanding of where you want to go with this and how this is going to relate to the bigger business strategy. And they're just much more equipped and grounded, right, in what the strategic goals are, to then also be able to provide greater recommendations and insight for how to facilitate change within their particular role or within their particular function. So this starts to really become a synthesis of the change management and of the design thinking frameworks. So as you're developing your change plans, I want you to just kind of consider these very simple design principles, as you embark on your roadmaps and as you embark on your strategy executions. The first is around empowering co-creation, right? Design and execute change initiatives in collaboration with those actors and stakeholders they directly impact. I cannot stress this point enough, right? We find once you get people together in a room, right, or through focus groups, it changes the dynamic culturally, and it also gives people the freedom to realize that they can actually communicate with each other across different functions and departments on their own, and not have to feel that they have to operate within their own silos. The next is visualizing the value of the change, right? So make sure that you're aligning to an inspirational vision and identifying those outcomes that ultimately define future state success. And an inspirational vision is critical, right? Because people want to feel that they have a sense of purpose in the work that they're doing, and being able to inspire people with a future that we're co-creating together goes a long way in driving engagement, driving participation, helping to improve people taking ownership. It'll also gain greater support around building champions to help move some of these change initiatives forward. And remember that we're essentially optimizing experiences, right? This is not just one roadmap after the next. This is about, thinking about those experiences of our actors, our stakeholders, right? The customers we're serving, right? The communities that we're serving, and quantifying the impact that change is going to have on the overall brand experience, and making sure that it's leading to the realization of your brand or organizational purpose. And then leading empathetically, right? Empathically. So this is about making sure that you're modeling performance expectations. And I want to emphasize the word model, right? It goes beyond just setting the expectations. Setting the expectations can be subjective, right? People will interpret what those expectations are in their own ways, and they'll apply it, in the way that they're familiar with. So modeling it and showing them what success looks like becomes important. And then, we were just saying, understand the needs of those actors, and make sure that, you understand how they're going to be impacted by this change and working with them to mitigate, any kind of challenges or barriers. I thought I saw a hand up. Is there a hand up? I can pause for a question. No. Okay. Jack?
Just a thumbs up, Jason.
Oh, okay.
Just agreeing with you.
Thank you. And then validating readiness, right? So this is about assessing the future readiness, prioritizing needs, and closing the gaps to mitigate change resistance. I think all too often we embark on these change initiatives without really understanding the current state of the culture, understanding where the gaps are, understanding organizational needs, understanding other initiatives that may be going on that may be consuming people's bandwidth and time, right? That has maybe taken other priorities. Let's not even start to get into the different change initiatives that may be driven at different levels within the hierarchy, right? And who then how do we start to prioritize, what should we be focusing on? Well, the CEO's driving this initiative, right? My manager's driving this initiative. Which one should I prioritize, right? And so it's important to validate that the employees are actually ready. The actors are actually ready to be able to take the baton from you and move that change initiative forward. And then lastly, enabling delivery, right? Making sure that you're equipping those actors with the knowledge, skills, tools, and practices to deliver within their role. So the synthesis of these, if we take these 6 principles, if you're able to take these 6 principles and start to apply them, in your own way within your change practice, you don't necessarily have to become an expert in design thinking or design methodologies, but thinking about how you facilitate change within your own organizations by adopting these simple principles will go a long way in helping to mitigate any type of resistance and ensuring success. But there's a further synthesis to be made here, which starts to get back to the communications and the education. If we take these 6 principles and synthesize them down, essentially this is what we're talking about. It's about co-creating valuable experiences when actors are ready to deliver. But here's the question. From a co-creation standpoint, you have to ask yourself, who are we co-creating? How are we co-creating and with who? Who are the actors? Who are the stakeholders? And let's remember, sometimes the actors, sometimes employees can be actors in one role and they may be stakeholders in another. So mapping all of that out becomes important. But we also then need to consider, how are we defining and qualifying what we mean by valuable, and valuable to who? It should be valuable to whatever the purpose of the change, right? So if it's about improving the customer experience, is this change going to be valuable to the end customer, right? If it's about improving how a function performs or improving, operational efficiencies, is it going to be valuable to the people that are actually being mandated to change, right? And then from an experience standpoint, whose experiences are we impacting? And who decides what a valuable experience actually is? So, when we start to think about the experiences that we're creating, put it in the context of your employees, right? Those internal customers, external customers, and really thinking about how you're going to be impacting their experiences based on this change. I mean, one anecdote, which I think we all can appreciate, right, is when you have, let's use call centers. We all remember when it was like, all companies went through and implemented these call centers to create operational efficiencies, and how frustrating it was for the customer experience when you're just getting on the phone with a robot and you could never get what you want to get done. So that's great. It created some efficiencies for the company, but it eroded the customer experience, which essentially eroded brand loyalty and retention and advocacy, which impacts business performance, which actually causes you to lose revenue, right? So it's, a lot of times these things can have an adverse effect. And then lastly, ready to deliver, right? How are we defining ready to deliver, right? How ready is ready? And what is needed to make sure that we equip those actors to deliver? And when will they actually be ready, right? That should all be built into the roadmap. So this becomes the design problem statement that we have to think about when it comes to change management, right? This is about changing the way we change. So in the true nature of design, we've established the problem statement. How do we go about co-creating valuable experiences when actors are ready to deliver? And so what I want to do now is we're gonna go into breakouts. Like Barry said, we want to make sure we get you out here on time. So we're going to break out for about 10 minutes. All right. When we move you into breakouts, think about this question, but then really think about, in the broader context around, why or why not apply design thinking to change management, right? How does design thinking impact, your current practice, and, what barriers need to be overcome to adopt design thinking, at our respective companies? I'm sure there's some of you that have had experiences doing some stuff in design. So let's let this be a little bit of sharing and learning, with each other within your breakout groups. And then what we'll want you to do is within your respective groups, designate 1 or 2 people, maybe have 1 or 2 people volunteer. When we bring back everybody into the main room, we'd love for each of your groups to kind of just spend, 60 seconds sharing the highlights of what you discussed. And I'll be happy to answer any questions when everybody comes back, if for some reason there were questions that you all were not able to answer on your own. Okay. So Barry, I'll turn it over to you to assist with the breakouts.
All right.
I needed more time with them. They were really educating me.
Well, welcome back, and we hope that continues.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, everyone had some good conversations. So let's, what I want to do is let's just take a minute or two. I'd love to, go around. Hopefully, you were able to assign 1 or 2 volunteers to kind of share back a little bit about your discussions. But by all means, some of the other folks in the room can help support each other. But yeah, just share back a little bit of thinking about those questions, thinking about how design thinking applies to change management. We'd love to kind of hear. And then by all means, if there were unanswered questions that came out of those conversations, throw them out there. I'd be more than happy to try to answer them as best as I can. So we want to start with group 1. Do we have that group? Does everybody know which groups they were in? I should probably ask that question.
I think we might have been group 4.
Okay.
Actually, before we start, I got a question, Jason, is in the empowering co-creation, we mentioned actors and stakeholders. What do you consider to be actors?
Yeah. So that's why I kind of preference. I mean, you can have an employee that could be an actor in one context and a stakeholder in another. Right. So, the actors would be the ones that would be responsible for actually implementing. And the stakeholders would be the ones that those things may be directly impacted. And in many cases within change initiatives within organizations, sometimes it could be those people managers, it could be, depending on what kind of transformation is being pushed forward, it could be the IT groups being those actors. So it really depends on what change initiative that you're embarking on. And that would really define who those actors and stakeholders are. But I would also recommend that as part of a design process is mapping out those actors and stakeholders at the start of a change initiative, because that will then help to also provide clarity in thinking through how you need to engage the organization in different ways. And there are exercises, there are things around actor and stakeholder mapping too to help get at those answers. Okay. Can we narrow in on group 1? Actually, Barry, do you have any references there to the people that were in group 1?
I did grab a screenshot. That was, let's see, Busail, Deb, Leslie, Linda, Manny, Molly, Erica, and Valencia.
Great. Do we have a spokesperson?
I think group 1 was agreeing that we find co-creation as a concept sounds rather idyllic and hard to implement in reality, because for me, and I think maybe for others in the group, it's like we're managing toddlers who don't remember why we're there and what our value is, what our role is in the strategy. And we go to other groups like comms. Comms is a good example where maybe we've made some assumptions about what their role is, or we haven't been crystal clear. And one of the good value add or instructions that we got from someone who's had better effectiveness, I think it was Erica, where she tells them what she needs specifically. And then maybe Leslie from Texas A&M, I think, was saying she's crystalline in her responses and requests for them. I need 3 things. I need them to look like this, so that they don't run around, and apologies to anyone in the group who's a comms person, but they don't run around wordsmithing things and like not actually helping us plan a change calendar, minimize change fatigue, and do some of that other stuff that, like, my assumptions have always been from the things they told me when they sold me their participation as a stakeholder, I thought they were going to do.
Yeah, I mean, and that's we see that all the time. I mean, a lot of this just goes back to the old ways of kind of managing things, and also for different people want to have control, right? So like, the comms are going to want to have control over the messaging, how the messaging gets rolled out. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that, the roles and responsibilities, right, of different functions and departments. It's not about just reassigning that power, right, and control, but it's about making sure that you're getting all of the input and feedback and synthesizing it so that you're just more informed with how you're communicating, right, how you're engaging. So that, and co-creation can happen in a multitude of ways, right? It can happen through focus groups, one-on-one interviews, right? Daily huddles, workshops. So sometimes the nature of co-creation may also vary too, depending on people's roles and functions. This is something to explore.
Is there well, I just wanted to do a follow-up. Is there a shortcut some way to kind of like redirect some of the turfing behavior that you see into something that's more like consistently very beneficial, like a huddle group? Is that a great way to get people to quit like throwing elbows and be more participative in a collaborative way?
Yeah, it's funny. We've used daily huddles sometimes as the Trojan horse to co-creation. So we'll help like develop daily huddles programs for managers, and and provide them with kind of like discussion guides for how to work with their teams, each morning. And every organization is different. They might do daily huddles or weekly huddles, but weaving in those aspects of co-creation too. The only caveat being is that there's one thing to co-create with your teams, but it's also co-creating across different functions and up and down the hierarchy, right? So and across. So depending on what change you're embarking on, remember, this is all about ensuring and improving success rates, right? So the more you can understand, the more you can learn along the way from people, just the more impactful it'll be, and the greater likelihood of success. So let's just for the sake of time, can we move on to group 2?
Group 2 was Diane, Herminder, Jack, Nina, Sally, let's see, and Amanda Sanchez.
Jack, were you the spokesperson? I see you talking.
Whispering to myself. As Arminda asked, we were just trying to clarify up front what an actor was, and whether that's an impacted person that'll live with it, or something like you mentioned, that maybe an implementer, whether it's a systems administrator or project team. So that was a question that we pondered, asking high quality questions. I think, I can't remember if it was Amanda or Diane had asked, how can we get invited to the table earlier so we hear the inputs, so that we know how to build a strategy and output, rather than them come very late in the game and say, hey, we need a strategy. It's like, to build that, we kind of need to know what the problem was, what the options are, who's involved, all the stuff that we do well when we're asked to play ball. I think also another question, and Barry lives this every day, is what does success look like for this effort, whether it's an initiative or a project or upgrade, and not just overwhelming like I've done before with what are your key metrics, intangible, tangible, how are you going to measure this, who's accountable, rather than the barrage. Just kind of sprinkle some seeds of where you're bringing value, which is insight, from outsider user perspective. I think that covered. Arminda or Diane, Amanda, if you have something else.
Yep, that covers it, Jack.
Great, that was great, wonderful. Group number 3.
All right, we had Amanda Pike, Amanda Schmolt, Angela, Laura, Monica, and Wilhelm.
All right, I was spokesperson for group 3. We talked about how a design approach is a natural transition from change management's focus on people. Some of us were already using it to facilitate strategy workshops with IT teams we were working with, and finding great success in that. And that really, for us as a practice, it's coming back full circle to our focus on people and the ability to empower people and make the changes more successful.
Perfect. I mean, that was, exactly. I mean, that's really what this is all about, right? Wonderful. All right. Group 4.
Now, group 4 was Wendy, Teresa, Mary Beth, Marie, Layla, Kate, and 1-713-409-8703. You know your number.
Yeah, we talked about how important it is to get alignment and really have the co-creation aspect as well. We talked about that. We talked about the empathy groups, right? When we co-create, we give a sense of empathy and we listen and help to create the vision for them, not with them, because hopefully at the top level, we all know what the vision is and the purpose of the change. Some keywords, co-create, valuable, and ready. Just really important, the questions that we ask. I'll let you, Marie, I see you there if you want to add anything. And there's Wendy.
Sure. Let me make sure I'm off of mute. You had said, or one of you had said that it's really great to really make sure that people involved in co-creating are heard and that they can feel empowered and they're contributing to what this is going to look like and give their ideas. So one of the questions that we talked about them asking was, what do you like about the system that you use now? And another can be, what do you wish the system did that it doesn't do? What's the limitation? And which helps you to solve for it. And then another thing we talked about was how important it is for them to have something to look forward to. If you can provide the vision, if they can see what the vision is, it's easier to move to something than it is to hang on to, to move forward. You have to have something you're looking forward to. So being able to let them articulate what they hear the vision to be and make it their own, I think is important.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else anybody want to add from group 4?
Actually, Marie, just to close out on that too, I mean, because that's also what you're tapping into there is it's also the beauty of tapping people's creativity and curiosity, right? I mean, it's like, we're a creative species. Like, we don't thrive by being thrown in front of a computer and just being told to do different tasks day in and day out, right? Being able to have, being empowered to be able to make certain types of decisions and thinking through the best ways of doing that and trying to figure it out, like, that's what gives us that sense of purpose in our work and what we do. So we want to make sure we maximize that, right? Not mitigate it, So I know we've only got a couple minutes left. First of all, thank you all so much. I mean, coming out of this, we're going to end up, we'll obviously share the presentation. And Barry, I know you have some closing thoughts, that you wanted to share before we wrap.
I did. First of all, thank you, Jason, for some great content for us. And I will let you know, we will be sending out that presentation for those who registered with an email. If you did not and want the presentation slides, you can email me, barry.bridges@acmptexas.org. Now, the bonus is on those on those presentation slides is Jason has a couple of links for you. So for some freebies, some great resources there for you. From Culture Design. So we appreciate having that, and that will be linked in the presentation tonight.
Yeah, and actually, just to clarify too, that making culture your strategic advantage will lay out our entire design methodology, right? And you can start to see where that implements, and you can integrate that into your change practice. And then how culture impacts business performance is the business case for this work. So it's a curation of third-party stats and proof points to be able to share with your teams internally too, to help build the case for implementing design practice.
Great tool. I took a sneak peek at that earlier and looking forward to getting to use that. In fact, I was sharing with Jason, I'm already using some of those insights that we talked about a week ago when we were in the pregame. So happy to have that. Thank you again, Jason. And I encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn at #ACMP Texas when you post change management content. Our chapter is a dynamic professional community. We'd like to be recognized as a vibrant and growing source of change management talent and expertise. And I'm happy to be a part of that as we work to grow ACMP Texas. As we're a part of a global network of change management professionals, ACMP Texas chapter advances the profession and discipline of change management within Texas. Our mission is to create a community of people who are passionate about organizational change for networking, knowledge sharing, and personal development. And we are excited to begin this series. And thank you, Jason, for kicking us off tonight. If you have questions or ideas for additional webinars or content or just discussions, feel free to reach out to me. Working towards building the ACMP Texas regional chapter for San Antonio. Happy to have Wendy with us tonight from ACMP Houston, and reach out to her as well, wendy.vallet@acmptexas.org, and she'll be glad to visit with you about things going on in Houston. Keep watching your LinkedIn as well as your announcements that come out about some great content that's coming up this fall. Thanks again for being with us tonight. We're right at 7 o'clock, so we're going to end on time. You all have a good night and enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank